Hello, my name's Bev and I'm the author of the book Please Eat, A Mother's Struggle to Free Her Teenage Son from Anorexia, which describes our family's battle with the deadly eating disorder, anorexia nervosa, which my teenage son Ben developed back in 2009 when he was just 15 years old. If you've been following my book on here or you've read it, you'll know that our holiday to France in summer 2010 was pretty awful, well, to put it mildly. And this particular post is looking back on that holiday because in 2011 I was understandably worried about whether we should actually book a holiday or not after the way the anorexia hijacked the holiday in France in 2010. And the funny thing, well, it wasn't funny at all, but I remember Cam saying just before that holiday in 2010 that it would be an excellent opportunity for us to go away and have a big happy family holiday together and to actually take a break from the anorexia. And I was instructed not to talk about eating disorders or food the whole time we were away, as if it was possible to take a break from anorexia and say, right, we'll put it on hold and we'll go away for 2 weeks and everything will be as normal back as how it was before the anorexia hit. And then when we get back to the UK, we can pick up where we left off. Unfortunately, eating disorders don't work like that. So this post from the 27th of February 2011 is called To Book a Holiday or Not to Book a Holiday. After last year, I'm in two minds as to whether or not we should book a holiday. So far we haven't booked anything and I'm tempted to leave it until nearer the time to see what happens. Before, we always used to book well in advance to be sure of getting the pick of reasonably cheap but luxurious French villas in nice locations. So last year, we'd booked well before we noticed that the anorexia had muscled its way into our lives. I think it was about this time last year that I emailed the villa owners to say that we might need to cancel, and if so, would they be able to find replacement guests? But by Easter, I had to make a definite decision, which was really difficult as my instinct said it might be a disaster. Yet I so wanted to go on holiday. At the time, I really thought that by telling Ben he'd need to get a move on with recovery or we wouldn't go to France, he'd somehow swing into action and head towards recovery at a rate of knots. But now, older and wiser, I know that could never have happened. Going on holiday to France was really weird. To all intents and purposes, we were a normal family going on a fantastic holiday. Before the anorexia, as a treat, I'd booked us into a first-class Commodore cabin on the ferry and booked a night at a Swiss hotel on the way back, plus another in Southampton. Also, the weather was lovely, and we'd always had such fabulous family holidays as a family. But right from the start, things went wrong. On the drive to Portsmouth, we stopped off for lunch at a dear little oldie-worldy pub with a fantastic menu. It took Ben ages to order, by which time we were predictably tense. When the food arrived, he immediately insisted on swapping his and his dad's meal, as his fish cakes had obviously been deep fried and he couldn't handle it. So the tension mounted almost before we'd left home, and his behaviour was predictably strange, should any nosy fellow diners cast a look our way. This was followed by the familiar pick up, put down, pick up again, put down again routine at Tesco's in Portsmouth as we attempted to buy a snack meal to eat on the ferry. The predictable mega low-calorie option was eventually chosen. And once on the ferry, Ben's mood deteriorated. We sat as miserable as sin in our luxury cabin and later in the bar. Ben ended up skulking off to bed early, refusing to have a drink with us at the bar. By the time we arrived at our lovely villa with pool, sun shining, weather wonderfully warm, and villa owners friendly and inviting, Ben was in a foul mood. Even before we'd unpacked, he'd descended into an eating disorder rage, and we had a hellish screaming match, which I'm sure our hosts could hear. The anorexia demon, as we called it, at its worst. Ben ended up barricading himself in his bedroom, me in tears and his dad sobbing on a garden seat outside, threatening to go home the next day. And how many times did we threaten to do that throughout the holiday? Then our hosts came round to formally welcome us. You could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. So that was the start of our wonderful French holiday last summer. And no, in general, things didn't improve as time went on. And yes, Ben did return, having lost some weight. Low points. On the beach, when Ben's mood tended to drop to rock bottom. In one direction was the sea, and I was seriously worried that he would get so depressed and helpless that he might walk out to sea, not caring what happened. One day I had to swim like an Olympic swimmer to drag him back towards the shore as the anorexia forced him to do the crawl, up and down, without caring how far out to sea he drifted. I was terrified. In the other direction were sand dunes, with a forest behind, leading to God only knows where, and once he paced off up there, not caring where he went, and didn't come back for ages. So beaches were bad news. What was weird was that all around us, life was going on as normal, yet we were in this hellish kind of capsule of high-tension, mega-low moods. By now Ben was descending into what eventually was diagnosed as clinical depression and unpredictable behaviour, or rather predictable in that you could predict it would be hellish. High points. Well, we did some nice cycle rides, but of course the demon loved cycle rides, especially up very steep hills, and some nice walks, which the demon liked too, though not as much as the strenuous cycle rides and daily 100 lengths up and down the villa pool. As a result, we haven't made a holiday booking this year. It's our first year without a holiday, and we used to love our family holidays so much. That's the end of that post. I mean, that post is really just a potted version of what happened on that holiday, and it's described in more detail in my book and in the chapter from my book, which I read below. It was an absolute nightmare. I'm also going to read the final post of February 2011, which was written on the day after, on the 28th of February, which is also about the holiday in France, and it's called Looking Back at My Around the Dinner Table post from August 2010. And if you remember, Around the Dinner Table is the forum for parents of young people with eating disorders, and you'll find a link to Around the Dinner Table below. Horrible though it was to recall, it's amazing how far we've come since that summer holiday in France. For example, that hellish tension. I remember being on red alert virtually all the time in those days, primed for whatever the demon, as we called it, would throw at me next. Anorexia behaviour is often referred to as unpredictable behaviour, but it's actually highly predictable in that you can predict it will be one way or the other, sometimes several times a day. My nerves were red raw, and I'd wake up every morning dreading what that day would bring, and long for Ben's dad to come home at weekends to take the strain off me a bit. In those days he was working away during the week, so I had to deal with everything at home alone. In those days, I didn't always see eye to eye with CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services who were treating Ben. I was concerned about them insisting that the vacation would be an opportunity for Ben to take a holiday from the eating plan. And if you remember, I'd been given an eating plan when we first began treatment with CAMS in February 2010, but I'd never actually been shown how to implement it, and I wasn't really being encouraged to do anything about it. So it was always considered to be Mum's eating plan. So it was like Ben and CAMS versus Big Bad Mum with her eating plan. So CAMS decided that our holiday would be a great opportunity to take a holiday from the eating plan. And I'll continue now. The thinking was that it would enable us all to relax, and we'd have a lovely, happy family holiday just like we used to, because that's what Ben and all of us so dearly wanted to have. In practice, it meant that Ben cut down on his food quite drastically. I'd been made to promise everyone that I wouldn't make comments or nag if I noticed anything like this, the thinking being that Ben could relax if I kept quiet. But it wrenched my heart to see Ben instantly going for all the diet options in the supermarket after we'd worked so hard to steer him away from them. And breakfast immediately transformed from a hefty 2-course affair into a quick couple of slices of toast. He'd have the minimum for lunch too, and at dinner time I had to be characteristically careful with what I cooked. We were self-catering, which in a way was better than a hotel. In those days, meal times were particularly tense, as you never knew how Ben would react to a meal. Sometimes he'd violently down tools, walk out and cry like an animal in pain, and bang his fists and head against the wall. At least he never got to the stage where he threw our furniture around, like some anorexia sufferers do. But he did break or damage quite a few things. Thankfully, nothing in the holiday villa. Of course, Ben didn't eat between meals in France, nor have any ice creams and so on. So I didn't either. I couldn't sit there enjoying an ice cream, knowing that the anorexia wasn't permitting him to do likewise. I guess that being on red alert didn't make things easy for anyone, least of all Ben. If you're in this situation now, you'll know exactly what I mean. In an ideal world, you'd be relaxed, calm, and encouraging, but in practice, it's more like an explosive volcano about to erupt. Naturally, we avoided all restaurants, except when we couldn't help it, like when we were staying in a hotel on the way back home. In a pub near Southampton, we deliberately chose to sit upstairs in an empty room to avoid spoiling the evening for other diners, should the demon decide to kick off. Ben took almost an hour to decide what to eat, debating what he could ask to be removed from the dish. Usually it was asking for something without cheese, without a sauce, or whatever. But hang on a moment, this post is supposed to be looking at how far we've come since then. Rewind to a couple of weeks ago, to when we were sitting in a country pub with Ben merrily tucking into a large plate of battered fish, chips and mushy peas. Or my birthday, when Ben and I went to Pizza Express and he ordered a normal pizza and not the low-calorie option, and a glass of wine and a dessert. And this after having a slap-up lunch care of Marks & Spencer's food department. In the back of my mind, there is still a slight bit of tension when eating out. Will something happen and we'll have a repeat of that other time in the same pub when he asked for a stir-fry and when he got it refused to eat it, ending it up in noisy tears, with half the pub staring at us, no doubt wondering why a 16-year-old boy was behaving like the terrible twos, and the waitress coming over time and time again to ask what was wrong. Back then, I'd say I was on 100% red alert virtually all the time. These days, it's about 2%, and it really just translates itself as me being quietly vigilant to make sure things are moving along smoothly. And yesterday, Ben had cheesy nachos for lunch. Imagine that back in the old days of last summer. So that's the end of that post and the end of the February entries. And it does show that by that time, by early 2011, Ben had come a hell of a long way. He really had. There was still a hell of a long way to go, but he had come a long way, which was excellent news. And if you click on to the next post, you'll find me looking back at March 2011. Thank you for listening. You'll find a link below to my blog, and you'll also find a link to my website where you can download free PDFs of my blog, and also a link to Amazon where you can buy a copy of my book.